Hello, my brother. Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. For most of my life, I never really gave much conscious thought to my own personal definition of what it means to be a man. Have you ever really thought about your own definition of what it means to be a man? And how much of that definition has been given to you based on how you were raised by your parents or their absence, what TV shows you watched, what social circles, what group of friends you ran with, what the women in your life have taught you, what the men in your life have taught you. And many of these conceptions have been caked on, layered on over the course of a lifetime where maybe very little of your definition of what it means to be a man has actually been defined by you. Perhaps you're quite conscious and very well defined in what it means for you to be a man. I would put you in the minority. I believe most men have never really thoughtfully sat down to define their own definitions of what it means to be a man. And when I started really taking this concept seriously of defining my own definition of what it means to be a man, and I believe it's a really personal journey for all of us. I don't think there is any one definition of what it means to be a man. I believe it's a journey that we all have to go on individually. And there are plenty of wonderful guides out there that can give us some perspective, that can teach us places that we may want to explore and offer us examples of healthy masculinity that can help shape our own. And one of those guides in my life has been a book that I've referenced multiple times on this show, which is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, written by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. And they explore four archetypes of the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover that they believe, if integrated fully, if each man is able to access these different parts of his masculinity, the king energy, the warrior energy, the magician energy, the lover energy, that he can become a whole and complete man. Now, what I'd like to do today is explore three questions that I believe this book answers powerfully, thoughtfully, very well researched, in order for you to kickstart some of your thinking around what does it mean to be a man in your own definition and in your own terms. The three questions we're going to be exploring are, number one, what is the patriarchy? What is the definition of the patriarchy? Number two, what does it mean to be in boy psychology? And number three, what does it mean to be in man psychology? And King, Warrior, Magician, Lover does an excellent job answering these three questions. So Robert Moore, I don't know about Douglas Gillette, who's the co-author. I know Robert Moore is a Jungian psychologist. Carl Jung is one of the forefathers of modern psychology. He's the, I suppose, the namer and inventor of the collective unconscious. There are basically three parts of the human psyche. It's our conscious awareness, our individual unconscious. So basically these things that we're not quite conscious of, but they're based on our own experiences, our lifetime, our interactions, what we've been taught. And then Jung discovered what he calls the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious, there's a much better definition than the one I'm going to give you, but it's basically the sum total of all of the unconscious and conscious experience of all living things in humanity that have ever existed. And that through that, we can somehow tap into the collective unconscious through dreams, through experiences. That's where many of these archetypes come from, like the king archetype, the warrior archetype, the lover, the magician. And that there's something deeply rooted in the experience of all human beings that presumably we can connect into. It's not just our own individualized experience. It's all of the human experiences, especially as we're talking about with masculinity, the masculine collective unconscious. And that's where these archetypes come from. If that is a little esoteric for you right now, hang with, because I'm going to be describing more about that as we dive deeper into this book, into some of the concepts. So let's dive into this first question around, what is the patriarchy? If you're a guy and you've been paying any semblance of attention over these last few years, the patriarchy has become the ultimate villain in our society. And it's become conflated with masculinity in general. They've become unfortunately, this interchangeable thing where if you're a man, if you're masculine, then you are automatically a part of the patriarchy. And King Warrior Magician Lover really helps to eliminate and annihilate that distinction, because the two couldn't be further from the truth. Healthy masculinity is the opposite of the patriarchy. And I'll read you some delineations in a moment here. But I remember a few years ago where I started to tune into this was when Brian and I started going to a number of events run for women in the city, where primarily the audience was 95 to 99% women. The conversations were around sexual consent, around women's rights, women's issues, and we heard a lot about the patriarchy in those forums, in those halls. And in some of those forums, the patriarchy was discussed quite thoughtfully and how it is quite oppressive to both men and women. And then there were other places where the patriarchy was almost like you could not distinguish between patriarchy and man. Like we felt like we were a part of the patriarchy just by having, masculine plumbing. And that didn't feel right to us either. So I turned to some real authority figures on this concept, and the King Warrior Magician Lover book is the first place and the best place that I've ever been able to get a definition on what the patriarchy is. So here's what they have to say about it. The patriarchy is the social and cultural organization that has ruled our Western world and much of the rest of the globe from at least the second millennium BCE to the present. The patriarchy is the expression of the immature masculine. It is the expression of boy psychology, the stunted masculine, fixated at immature levels. Patriarchy is based on fear, the boy's fear of women, to be sure, but also the fear of men. So check this out. The patriarchy is the expression of boy psychology, the stunted masculine. Basically, where boys who have not learned how to be men are running around in grown men's bodies, who have grown men's responsibilities, who have grown men's positions of power. You can probably look at certain levels of the government and political offices and quickly identify boys who are running around in men's bodies. You can do the same as you look at businesses and who runs organizations. You can do the same as you look at family units, where there's a father of the family who runs the family, who has authority in the family, but in many cases is a boy running around in a man's body. And one of the biggest problems that King Warrior Magician Lover exposes is that there's been a disappearance of ritual processes in the Western society from initiating boys into manhood. Right? And what he says is, what Gillette and Moore say, is that we need to take very seriously the disappearance of ritual processes for initiating boys into manhood. There are many who either had no initiation into manhood or who had pseudo-initiations that failed to evoke the needed transition into adulthood. And what happens over time is when we have so many stunted masculine, so many boys who have never learned how to become a man or what the key characteristics of being a man are, or defining what it means to be a man, and then those men run into positions of power for thousands of years, then it can be quite devastating in its effects. It can be quite suppressing. It can be quite violent. It can be quite painful, not only to women, but also to those of us men who want to live in the mature masculine. So that leads us to our second question, which is, well, then what does it mean to be a boy, right? Like, what is boy psychology? And I want to read you a passage from the book. The drug dealer, the ducking and diving political leader, the wife beater, the chronically crabby boss, the hotshot junior executive, the unfaithful husband, the company yes man, the indifferent graduate school advisor, the holier-than-thou minister, the gang member, the father who can never find the time to attend his daughter's school programs, the coach who ridicules his star athletes, the therapist who unconsciously attacks his clients' shining and seeks a kind of gray normalcy for them, the yuppie. All these men have something in common. They are boys pretending to be men. They got that way, honestly, because nobody showed them what a mature man is like. Their kind of manhood, in quotes, is a pretense to manhood that goes largely undetected as such by most of us. We are continually mistaking this man's controlling, threatening, and hostile behaviors for strength. I want to read that again. We are continually mistaking this man's controlling, threatening, and hostile behaviors for strength, when in reality, he is showing an underlying extreme vulnerability and weakness, the vulnerability of the wounded boy. In our lives, inevitably, all of us grow up with wounds that are unhealed, traumas that are unprocessed, pains that are never addressed. And when boys are left without the skills, without the tools, without the introspection, without the support, without the nurturing and guidance of healthy, mature masculine, then we grow up with those wounds. We grow up with armor. We grow up with that insecurity. We grow up with weaknesses that we don't know how to address. And that's how we become immature boys in men's bodies. That's where the patriarchy comes from, at least from what this book seems to posit. And this concept of pseudo-initiations that exist in our Western society that are supposed to bring a boy into manhood, these pseudo-initiations are gang initiations, right? Fraternity initiations. I know I went through a fraternity initiation. There were bits and pieces where there was some helpful, useful, growth-oriented elements, but 99% of it was, let's turn the keg on in the basement and you guys don't leave until it's finished. Like, that doesn't teach me anything about what it means to be a healthy masculine man. It doesn't teach me anything about my own definition of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a man amongst men, right? Prison systems have initiation rituals. There's hazing rituals for athletic teams, right? Like, you've all been a part, most of us have been a part of some sort of pseudo ritual, very little of which has taught us anything meaningful about what it means to be a man. As the book states, more often than not, they initiate the boy into a kind of masculinity that is skewed, stunted, and false. It is apatriarchal manhood, one that is abusive to others and often of the self. Most of the initiation rituals, the hazing, is often abusive to the individual and to the self. So boy psychology, therefore, is charged with the struggle for dominance of others. Boy psychology is charged with the struggle for dominance of others. A boy feels powerful. A wounded, stunted boy feels powerful through being dominant over another. He cannot feel powerful, safe, secure unless someone else is beneath him. And this gets into the third question, which is, well, then what is man psychology? And in King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, they define man psychology as the opposite of boy psychology's struggle for dominance. It says, man psychology is nurturing and generative, not wounding and destructive. Man psychology is nurturing and generative, not wounding and destructive. In order for man psychology to come into being, there must be death. Death, symbolic, psychological, or spiritual, is always a vital part of any initiation ritual. And in psychological terms, the ego of the boy must die. That's what they're talking about regarding death. In order for a man to arise, the boy must die. And I believe I've shared in one of the recent podcasts about Nelson Mandela's ritual when he was a young boy, right? Like, in his tribe, in his region that he grew up, the boys were stripped from their mothers, causing a clean break from dependency on the moms. And moms in that tribe participated in that experience. They all knew that this was a welcoming, a graduation of their boy into manhood. It was something that everyone participated in. The boys were stripped from their mothers, taken to huts that were, I think, down near a river under the care of wise ritual elders, where those boys, over a series of days or even weeks, were taught how to become men. And one of the parts of the ritual was pretty brutal, but they circumcised every single one of the boys, which symbolized the death of their boy, right? The foreskin that was cut from them was then buried. Each of the boys buried their foreskin, which was symbolically burying the boy in them so they could go back to their homes as men. So in order for man's psychology to come into being, there must be death, a symbolic, psychological, or spiritual death, which is always of the boy ego. And most of us have never been through a thoughtful, guided process of saying goodbye to the wounded boy and stepping into masculinity. And in the book, they talk about the ritual process is contained by two things. The ritual process for initiation into manhood. Number one is you need a sacred space. And number two, you need a ritual elder, a wise older man that can help guide you through the process of ego death from boyhood into manhood. Now, over the course of my life, I've gone through a variety of ritual processes. The Mankind Project, which was informed quite a bit by Robert Moore, did a lot of consulting. The author of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover did a lot of consulting with the weekend rituals and the processes for the Mankind Project to create that ritual element that's missing in the Western world. And I can see, I didn't have I don't have foreskin, but they didn't chop off foreskins, but we did have specific processes of moving from boyhood into manhood in that experience. But I've never really had something like what Nelson Mandela experienced, where all of the men or the boys of my age went through something together, where we left at one age, at one psychological age in our lives, and then came back a different part. It was never like that. We all have kind of just morphed into men. And that's a problem. That's what creates the wounded masculine. That's what creates this lack of awareness around our own personal definitions of what it means to be a man. And so what I intend to do in some of these subsequent podcasts is dive into some of the archetypes of what healthy masculinity looks like in the king archetype, in the warrior archetype, the magician, and the lover, so that you can start to get a deeper sense of where those energies show up for you powerfully and where some of those energies may be stunted, where you may still be in the boyish ways of that energy, and some of the things that you can do to get yourself into the healthy masculine. Because a great man consciously designs his own definition of what it means to be a man, and there's no way that we can do that without understanding the distinction between what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a man. And the only way that we can know where we're going with our definition of manhood is by consciously designing it ourselves.